Good morning. I am Dr. Soni Vadva, Joint Director Research at the Maritime History Society. On behalf of Team MHS, I would like to welcome you all for our first National Maritime Heritage Conclave, conceptualized around the theme of exploring unsung frames in Indian maritime history. Before we formally begin, let me share a few house rules that shall ensure smooth proceedings and give you a better experience. Use the comments box to drop your questions, observations, and comments. The moderator or the session in charge would collect the same from there. If you get disconnected from the session, you can join back using the same link. Visit the Conclave webpage to find the link in case you lose the link. With that, let me now invite our director, Commodore Oracle Johnson, to officially welcome you all and proceed towards the interesting lineup of deliberations. Commodore Oracle Johnson was commissioned into the Indian Navy on 3rd August after attaining the qualification of a second mate certificate in the Merchant Navy. A navigation and aircraft direction specialist, he is an alumnus of Defence Services Staff College, Wellington, and of College of Naval Warfare, Karanja. In addition to key command and staff appointments over a range of naval units, the officer has undertaken significant work in military wargaming and also in leadership cum behavioral studies. He is a qualified interviewing officer for the Services Selection Board. His PhD is on effective governance of multilateral operations, implications for contemporary international politics from Department of Civics and Politics, University of Mumbai. Commodore Johnson is also visiting faculty at the Naval War College. He has presented a number of papers on international maritime theory and India's maritime heritage. He has authored a book titled Timeless Wake: The Legacy of Royal Indian Navy in World War II and co-edited a compilation titled Essays in Maritime Studies, Volume 3, both published by Maritime History Society, Mumbai in 2013 and 2016, respectively. At present, Commodore Johnson is posted at Mumbai as the curator, Maritime History Society. He is also a visiting faculty at University of Mumbai and a speaker on maritime topics. He is a sailor turned scholar whose navigational expertise, matched with his active involvements in academics, made our founder, late Vice Admiral M.P. Avatni, trust Commodore Johnson with the charge of taking amateurs ahead. With multiple books to his credit, he stands out in the field of maritime history as emerging from India thanks to his background as a sailor. He is the force behind bringing together a full fledged research team and steering original research on Indian maritime history. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Soni. Good morning to a very illustrious and eminent panel, both in the studio and to many joining from the YouTube link. I would understand, being the inaugural session, if there are a few connects, the team at the back end will help you. Vice Admiral R.B. Pandit, Chairman, Maritime History Society and Chief of Staff, Western Naval Command. Professor Vasant Shende, Director General, National Maritime Museum at Lothal. Director in charge of Gujarat Maritime University, Professor Dr. Shanta Kumar, and Gujarat Maritime University being the academic partner. I also welcome Captain Gajanan Karanjikar, who is not here in this session, but as the founder president of the All India Marine Pilots Association, he is another collaborator, and the Daily Guardian team. Many other veterans serving and retired flag officers, maritime enthusiasts, members from the media, academia, greetings, and I express my personal thanks and gratitude for joining the endeavors of the Maritime History Society this morning to the first ever National Maritime Heritage Conclave. Let me begin by going on to the phrase of maritime consciousness, or as I wrote yesterday in the Curtain Raiser article, multiple frames of maritime consciousness. This is the century of the seas, and we have multiple sea-based trade connects which you will hear Professor Shinde talk about in a while. One of the big challenges that India faces today is a prevailing mindset where cultural heritage and professional sea-based activities need to integrate to build what is in our core and we as a maritime nation. And the needs therefore are to reinforce understanding of maritime history in the public domain, elevate public attention on maritime presentation of seas, comprehend the presentation of seas in better form, comprehend and bring awareness of maritime sector as a collaborative effort to strengthen contemporary maritime past of India for a great maritime future. Why is this important? India's maritime character, its heritage, its geostrategic location are all factors that have defined our growth as a nation. And with a very rugged terrain and with ranges from mountains to coastline along the entire boundary lines, India naturally extends into the sea as a reality that is being realized over a period of time. Indian maritime history requires a greater appreciation. We need to develop a comprehensive maritime consciousness. We need to introspect deeply on our engagement with the Indian Ocean and our understanding of the past, foster an environment of informed maritime opinion among the various agencies, and engender awareness of our sustainability and consciousness. With that, I would like to hand over back to the anchor to introduce briefly our inaugural address, the chairman, MHS. Back to you, Dr. Soni, and welcome once again to the conclave.
Thank you, sir. Let us now proceed to the inaugural address by Vice Admiral R.B. Pandit, Chief of Staff, Western Naval Command, and also Chairman, MHS. Vice Admiral R.B. Pandit, winner of Ati Vishisht Seva Medal, was commissioned into the Indian Navy on 1st July 1984. A silver medalist at NDA, gold medalist and Sword of Honor during afloat training, and winner of Themaya Medal for the most spirited officer at DSSC Wellington, the flag officer is also an alumnus of the Royal College of Defence Studies, London. An anti-submarine warfare specialist, he has tenanted several prestigious appointments ashore, afloat and in training. These include command of Indian Navy ships Nirghat, Vindhyagiri and Jalashwa. He has also been instructor at Anti-Submarine Warfare School, Fleet ASW Officer Eastern Fleet, Captain Workup at LWT West, directing staff at Naval War College and principal director at Directorate of Staff Requirements at Integrated Headquarters of Ministry of Defence, Navy. He also served with distinction as a defense advisor in Indian High Commission at Islamabad, Pakistan from 2002 to 2006. As flag officer, he has been in charge of foreign cooperation and intelligence at Integrated Headquarters of the Ministry of Defense, Chief of Staff, Southern Naval Command, and the Fleet Commander of the Navy's sword arm, the Western Fleet. Prior to his current appointment as Chief of Staff, Western Naval Command, he was the Commandant of Indian Navy Academy at Ezimala, Kerala. For the purposes of this National Maritime Heritage Conclave, he has recorded a special message on video. The same shall soon be played live.
Vice Admiral A.R. Karve, Patron MHS, Professor Vasant Shinde, Director General, National Maritime Museum, Lothal, Professor Shanta Kumar, Director, Gujarat National Law University and Director in Charge, Gujarat Maritime University, veterans, serving naval personnel, members of the academia and the media, greetings. It is with great pleasure that I appear before you to inaugurate the first National Maritime Heritage Conclave, which is the digital avatar of the 41st Annual Maritime History Society seminar on the theme Exploring Unsung Frames in India's Maritime History. At the outset, I would like to congratulate the entire team at the MHS for their untiring effort at awakening maritime consciousness in our fellow citizens, and this time reaching out to a larger national audience. Maritime history of India deserves a closer look and the attention of both the young and the veteran, the scholar and the curious, the academic and the layperson alike. And I am delighted to note that the conclave this time takes into ambit the full spectrum of the audience. The Indian Navy, I would say, is well informed about India's maritime history, for it illuminates the past and enables the Navy to build on the experience of our forebears. That said, it is not a secret that our maritime legacy is not well documented or studied adequately, and that for far too long we have relied on the work of itinerant explorers, foreign adventurers, and colonial masters. They have come, benefited from what we have had to offer, and presented a narrative that ignored or downplayed certain facets while emphasizing others. Slowly but surely, we are making good the gaps in our understanding through the effort of many voices, both individual and institutional. This conclave seeks to go down this road, find nooks and crannies to explore, and to dig out nuggets of information that will serve to make a vivid picture when put together. In the maritime world today, we are equipped with the best of technology to navigate the world's oceans, and this has served to make seafaring a lot safer and predictable than it ever was. But if I may say so, it has also taken away some of the romance associated with seafaring. While it is interesting to note how Indians across ancient and medieval ages handled the rigors and dangers of seafaring, or to revel in the knowledge that the word navigation comes from the Sanskrit word navgati. But have we dug deeper? What do we know of the lived realities of those sailors and navigators, the traders who braved ocean voyages? It is only very recently that we have made any serious effort to explore these issues. And though we are now beginning to appreciate the logbooks that the Kutchi Malams maintained 4 to 5 centuries back, Prime Minister Narendra Modi released the book Malam Ni Pothis, a collection of Gujarati manuscripts describing the pre-modern navigation techniques of Gujarat in April 2015. There is nevertheless a lot that remains to be explored. While going back in time is not possible, we can certainly turn to the coastal communities to understand their lives, find traces they may have retained of the lifestyles, beliefs, and cultural practices evolved over the millennia of an intimate connect with the oceans. Our coasts are home to communities whose perceptions, understandings, and knowledge about the sea we have failed to record. We know of the broad things, like our maritime trade intercourse right from the days of the Harappan civilization. But connecting the intimate lessons of the past will probably help us navigate the shoals and hazards of the present, the many challenges affecting coastal communities both directly and indirectly. Can we learn from the past to help balance the need for development with its impact on the coast, or help make seafaring a rewarding vocation for the traditional communities? For over 5 centuries, the coaling fishing communities have been living and working all along the coastal waters of the 7 islands that make up the present-day city of Mumbai. But today, not only is their livelihood under threat, but also their very existence. It is a matter of regret as well as astonishment that we have increasingly seen the coalies being replaced by fishers from interior parts of India, including Bihar and also Himalayan Nepal. Is this a portent of things to come? In this light, what we learn about the coastal communities is crucial. Who knows how many communities and populations have vanished in the recent past because of the changes in the oceans all around us? What can we know about the people who used to live around the Lothal dock that was in use until even the 18th century, till the seas dried up around it? While some experts may understand the cause and effect relationship of such significant realignments, we need such issues to be discussed in public forums such as these. And we expect that we shall begin to bridge gaps in our understanding of history and heritage through the eminent and young scholars involved in the discussions. We hope that in the process of listening, we shall be enlightened about how to help the communities undertake appropriate development initiatives, channelize tourism opportunities, whilst helping them sustain livelihoods and also contributing to the preservation of Indian maritime cultural heritage in general. Let us spend some time thinking about the richness of our maritime past as lived by them. And I'm sure listening to the experts talk about anthropological and historical aspects of these issues will be fascinating. The second sub-theme of today's conclave, gender vis-a-vis sea-mindedness, is not only relevant as more and more women are breaking glass ceilings and shattering stereotypes. Even in the seafaring world, it will be interesting to know more about the endeavors of the so-called weaker sex in this area over time. I look forward to listening to the speakers, women officers, talk about the experience of the sea and to throw light on some inspiring examples from our past so that the debate moves from the petty and the trivial consideration to a more nuanced one. In the context of sea consciousness, some of our recent initiatives, Project Mausam, Sagarmala, or Samudra Setu, take forward the legacy of connectivity our ancestors have bequeathed to us. While we know about India's trade connect with Southeast Asia and Mesopotamia since the beginning of our civilization, new details keep emerging. Indeed, breakthroughs in our historical understanding of the transoceanic exchanges, both cultural and commercial, have relevance to current day geopolitics, and continued research on the topic will always remain a priority. India must learn about her maritime past in order to understand her present and her interrelationship with her maritime neighbors. I am confident that the scholarly papers set to be presented in the session on the transoceanic connectivity in the Indian Ocean region will highlight fresh perspectives on our ties with countries on the Indian Ocean rim. There is a clear resurgence of interest in the academia among general enthusiasts and those who follow trends and narratives, and showing fresh interest in the maritime medium. The Indian Navy has always taken the lead to enhance education as well as awareness, enhancement of India's maritime tradition and capability into the public knowledge space. A dedicated history project collates content to bring out a compilation every decade. An initiative in hand is to collaborate in the production of a children's comic series to build interest in our maritime past amongst the young. We are committed to see the Maritime History Society take forward its vision of excellence in maritime studies that has driven a series of digital initiatives even through these last 7 months of the pandemic-induced restrictions. Do visit the online content of the MHS and pass on the learnings to a wider audience. With these few remarks in mind, I declare the conclave open. I look forward to fruitful discussions, questions, and comments on exploring the unsung frames in Indian maritime history. I wish the organizers the very best for setting a benchmark that they must meet and exceed in their journey towards meeting their Golden Jubilee goals. I extend my thanks to the veteran scholars and young researchers for setting time out to integrate their thoughts and present them to the audiences. And I show great solidarity with all maritime enthusiasts, including naval personnel attending the conclave, for it is their sustained expression of interest in the subject that sustains us. Let us remember that we have gathered here to reflect on subjects less studied from a maritime history, and not just to enjoy the discussions, but also take them forward. Let no frame be missed or remain unsung. The prominent and the ordinary all deserve study, capture, and projection to build a wave of influence of a maritime India. Let heritage awaken our maritime consciousness. Jai Hind, Shamno Varuna. May the ocean god be auspicious unto us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for inaugurating the conclave and for ensuring your presence in your absence, as they say. Let us move forward towards the thematic address of the conclave, which will be delivered by Professor Dr. S. Shantakumar. He is the director, Gujarat National Law University, with about 29 years of teaching experience at prestigious universities, including Hidayatullah National Law University. He has authored 3 books on environmental law and 2 books on human rights law. Currently, he is the chair of Environmental Law Study Group of the International Association of Law Schools. He is also serving as the country focal point for India for the Asian Development Bank project on environment and climate change law. He is also the recipient of prestigious awards like the Environmental Law Champions Development Award from Asian Development Bank, Philippines, and the Best Social Scientist Award from the Indian Society of Criminology. It is under his leadership that Gujarat Maritime University has become the academic partner for this conclave. We welcome you, sir. Kindly give us your views on the theme of the conclave, Unsung Frames in Indian Maritime History. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Soni. Distinguished speakers in the inaugural session, Vice Admiral R.B. Pandit, AVSM, Chief of Staff, Western Naval Command and Chairman of the Maritime History Society, Professor Vasant Shinde, Director General, National Maritime Museum, Lothal, Commodore Dr. Vodakal Johnson, Director, Maritime History Society, other eminent speakers, conference attendees, ladies and gentlemen. I deem it an honor and privilege to deliver this thematic address at this Maritime Heritage Conference. My sincere appreciations to the Maritime History Society, which is a 42-year-old academic initiative of the Western Naval Command of the Indian Navy. Despite the lockdown in place for over 6 months, it has sustained a targeted awareness enhancement of Indian maritime dimensions through online media. True to its mission of awakening maritime consciousness, the Maritime History Society holds an annual seminar on a specific element of maritime attention. This 42nd edition of its annual Maritime History Seminar has been upgraded to National Maritime Heritage Conclave, and I'm extremely delighted to be a part of this Maritime Heritage Conclave. Coming to the theme, India, gifted with a very rich maritime history, has witnessed a resurgent interest in the past few years with synergized efforts from the national leadership, academia, key intellectuals, and initiatives of integrators like the Maritime History Society. I'm extremely happy to know that this conclave will definitely stimulate discussions on the underexplored dimensions of Indian maritime history and become starting points for further research in maritime history with the coastal communities and women at the center of its attention, which will certainly provide an opportunity to bring to light the lesser known narratives surrounding the coastal communities and women. In spite of advances in science and technology, and in spite of socio-cultural, economic developments happening globally, it is extremely disappointing to learn that the maritime sector have been uniquely affected by gender biases over the years. Though historically, women have played a very important role in advancing a number of issues central to ocean governance, as understood today, whether in the context of industrial and small-scale fisheries or about ships and vessels. The gendered life worlds of marine-based societies have been amply documented, particularly in terms of how sailing, surfing, maritime navigation, and other forms of seafaring have historically been perceived as distinctly masculinized practices. While some have credited this difference with the gendered perception of women's work, in order to counteract evidence of male domination of the industry. From 1989 onwards, the International Maritime Organization has supported a capacity building program called Strengthening Maritime Resource Development. This program, initially called Strategy on the Integration of Women in the Maritime Sector, encourages the participation of women in all spheres of the maritime sector. With the second conference on maritime women global leadership held in 2014 by the World Maritime University in Sweden, gender-related issues were observed among various maritime sectors, including seafaring, ports, administration, law, and education. No doubt, including women as part of a diverse maritime workforce enlarges the talent pool available for highly competitive market, providing a global benefit for both the public and private maritime sectors. Empowering women in the maritime community was selected as the World Maritime Day theme for 2019. This provided an opportunity to raise awareness of the importance of gender equality in line with the SDGs and to highlight the important contribution of women all over the world to the maritime sector. As per the study conducted by ILO, International Labour Organization, women represent only less than 2% of the world's 1.25 million seafarers, and 94% of the 2% of female seafarers are working only in the cruise industry. Within this historically male-dominated industry, IMO has been making a concerted effort to help the industry move forward and support women to achieve a representation that is in keeping with the 21st century expectations. Within the framework of maritime development and through its Women in Maritime program under the slogan Training, Visibility, Recognition, IMO has taken a strategic approach towards enhancing the contribution of women as key maritime stakeholders. We need to support the participation of women in both shore-based and sea-going ports. Employment in the shipping sector has been shown to provide women with access to a regular means of livelihood. This has a direct impact on the economic viability of the extended family structure, particularly in the developing regions of the world. For effective ocean governance, an irreducible contribution of female voices is necessary. Overall, women are often regarded as major actors driving sustainable development because of their inclusiveness and collaborative roles. Similarly, we have proof that women have advocated for the common good in marine conservation, raising important and often neglected concerns. If women, for instance, are not included in fisheries management, we miss the complete picture of social, ecological linkages of marine ecosystems. In maritime industries, women will definitely enlarge the talent pool for innovation and smart growth. Besides the manifold possibilities for promoting the involvement of women in ocean governance and policy making, we still find how gendered biases still influence our interactions with the ocean. It is necessary to reduce the structural and systemically embedded hurdles that continue to lead to gendered decision taking with regard to the ocean. In this context, this Maritime Heritage Conclave on the theme of coastal communities and influence of women in maritime history intends not only to recognize the role of women in coastal communities in ocean governance from an historical perspective, but also to empower women in the maritime community and remind the need to ungender the ocean, to explain why women matter in ocean governance. Efforts like this and IMO's gender program, initiated in 1989, has helped put in place an institutional framework to incorporate a gender dimension into IMO's policies and procedures. This has supported access to maritime training and employment opportunities for women in the maritime sector. I'm extremely proud to say that when we started the first batch of at the Gujarat Maritime University last year, 60% of our students were girls. And even in the batch which we admitted recently, 55% of our students are girls. I'm extremely happy about it. I believe conferences like this and the deliberations therein revolving around the role of women in ocean governance, while not only acknowledge the historical contributions women have made, but will also certainly contribute to create more opportunities and possibilities for more and more women to join the maritime sector and play a very significant role in ocean governance and in the maritime industry. I thank Commodore Dr. Vodakal Johnson, Director, Maritime History Society, for giving me this wonderful opportunity to be a part of this very important conclave and for giving the opportunity for the Gujarat Maritime University to be an academic partner for this wonderful initiative of the Maritime History Society. I wish the conclave a grand success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Indeed, the pleasure is all ours. Let us now turn to the next speaker on the agenda, Professor Dr. Vasant Shinde, who will be delivering the keynote address for the conclave. He needs no introduction. He is internationally renowned as an archaeologist, former Vice Chancellor to the Deccan College Postgraduate Research Institute. He is presently the founding Director General of the National Maritime Heritage Complex at Lothal.
So thank you very much. I would like to thank the organizers, particularly Commodore Johnson of the Maritime History Society, for inviting me here and giving me this opportunity to interact with maritime enthusiasts, who are there in fact in the country. And I am quite aware about the activities being carried out by the Maritime History Society. I think they are doing a great job and doing really, trying to reconstruct the maritime history of the country, which is so wide, so huge, and varied. Perhaps India has such a vast coastline, and perhaps we have the richest and the varied, maritime, culture. In fact, maritime heritage, spanning from Gujarat to Bengal, covering almost 9 states and 4 union territories, and covering a distance of nearly 7,500 kilometers, which is a huge coastline India has. Before I, share my thoughts, in fact, I'll be just, giving, my thoughts basically. Before I share my thoughts, I would like to update you about the two important developments in the country. One is that the Ministry of Shipping is developing a maritime heritage complex at Lothal, and I think if things go as per our plan, that complex will be ready within next 3 years, and that is being done by the Ministry of Shipping, Government of India. And the other important project about which very few people know is the project Mausam, which is launched by the Ministry of Culture, Government of India in 2016. And both, in fact, the project Mausam and the National Maritime Heritage Complex, both have the the objective is more or less same. Both are doing, they are trying to showcase and try to reconstruct the maritime history of the country. And we would like to know, in fact, more about the contribution made by India, in fact, during the maritime contact. So this is, very, very important, developments. And in case of Project Mausam, the plan is that to involve nearly 40 countries which are located on the Indian, rim region. And we would like to know, in fact, more about the climate and its impact on human culture, and also, how human cultures have progressed, in fact, from the early stage to the modern times. Now, when it comes to the understanding about the maritime contact in the Indian subcontinent, it goes back to almost 7000 BC. In fact, there is a very important site in Pakistan, Mehergarh, and it is here that we find the earliest evidence of the settled life in this part of the world, which goes back to 7000 BC. And this particular site was excavated on very large scale by a French scholar called Jeb Jarij and his team for nearly 13 to 14 years. And what is important that the evidence that they have gathered that clearly indicates that the maritime contacts were established right from the beginning of settled life. In fact, at the in the earliest levels at Mehergarh, they have found the some objects which are coming from very far off places, probably during by establishing maritime contacts. Particularly, there are some objects coming from Oman, some from Iran, found in fact at this particular site. So we believe that that the maritime contacts happen in fact right from the early stage of the settled life, and then probably the importance of this particular maritime contact were identified by the Harappan people. In fact, we have done immense research on the maritime contact of the Harappans, and we have some evidence which really gives us some idea about the advancement made by the Harappans in the maritime contact, maritime history. The site of Lothal, which is chosen for the development of National Maritime Heritage Complex. Now that is unique site in fact in the world because it is here that we find the earliest dockyard excavated anywhere in the world. And perhaps Harappans were the pioneer in fact in developing ships and boats, the evidence of which is found on the Harappan seals. So it is quite important that we understand this history of the maritime, which begins from this. Secondly, we always talk about the maritime contacts, maritime objects, etc. But we are rarely we try to understand what is the impact of the maritime contact on the India's economy, and what we can learn in fact from the maritime contacts that began in fact maybe almost 5000 years ago. Now when it comes to understanding the maritime history, the Harappans of course are credited with the development of maritime trade, and perhaps Harappans had realized the importance of the trade for the development of the culture. We see in fact that once the maritime trade was flourished in fact during the maybe middle phase of the Harappan culture, then perhaps they started developing the urbanization, and we clearly maybe align the first urbanization that happened during the Harappan times and the second urbanization that happened when we started developing contact with outside world again, with particularly with the Roman world. So that time the second urbanization happened. So both these urbanizations, and then of course after the second urbanizations, the urbanization and the maritime history continued throughout till modern times. And even today, in fact, the government of India has realized the importance of the maritime trade and contact, and because of that, India is giving so much emphasis on the maybe trade with outside countries, and the maritime trade particularly plays very, very important role. And what is important here, I would like to tell what we can learn from the Harappans, and not only us in fact, probably some other countries also have learned. I always give the example of that. What the Harappans did in fact, that is something to learn from them. They had lot of disadvantages. They did not have sufficient raw materials within their area. They had to import the raw material from outside, maybe from the communities who were contemporary to the Harappans. But the Harappans had the technology with them, so they imported the raw material from outside. They produced goods, and they supplied the finished good to the same people from whom the maritime from whom they obtained the raw materials for the production of the artifacts. So this is how, in fact, the Harappans, began, the development of the culture. They began to, receive a lot of maybe wealth from outside, and they realized that the West were completely were dependent on the Harappans. So there was a lot of demand for the articles made by the Harappans in West, particularly in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and even in Persian Gulf region. Particularly the articles made of what they call as the red stone, that is carnelian. There was so much demand, in fact, for that. So what Harappans did, in fact, the Harappans started developing contact, maritime contact with them. They used two routes, of course. One is the maritime route, sea route, and the other one, of course, is the land route. So the evidence that we have gathered so far, that has clearly reconstructed both the routes that were adopted and followed by the Harappans. But they found the maritime route quite convenient, because they can easily contact some of the Gulf countries like Oman directly, and then of course from there it was easy for them to contact people in Mesopotamia and also further Egypt. So the amount of data that we have both, in fact, literary data as well as the archaeological data, and the text, in fact, found in Mesopotamia that clearly mentions about a place called Meluha, and Meluha is referred to as the Harappan region. And the text also gives the list of the objects that were imported from the Meluha region, in which, of course, we can talk about the articles made of shell, articles made of copper, or what they call as the red metal, then articles made of semi-precious stone. So these are some of the important objects mentioned in the text, and we actually have found the evidence of that in number of Mesopotamian sites, particularly at Ur and Uruk. And what we see, in fact, is that the Harappans were sending more goods, and they were importing less goods from that site. That is the evidence that we are getting. So that means the trade was beneficial to the Harappans. So they started getting a lot of wealth from the West. And what they did, in fact, unlike the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians, Mesopotamians and Egyptians had different, maybe administrative system. There may be, monarchical system, and a lot of wealth was used on the, for providing maybe the comfort and some kind of prestige to these monarchical states in that part. So a lot of wealth was buried along with the maybe dead bodies of queen and kings. So huge amount of wealth was buried there, and they also undertook a lot of large, maybe monumental building architecture. For example, in Egypt, of course, they built huge pyramids, and in Mesopotamia they use those huge ziggurats, etc. Apart from that, they manufacture a lot of life-size images of human and animal. We don't see that, in fact, in the Harappan region. That does not mean that the Harappans were not really competent enough. Perhaps, as per my understanding, perhaps the Harappans were much more advanced than the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians. And if they had decided, they could have easily constructed this type of monumental architecture, but they have not done that. So that means that the thinking of the Harappans was completely different. The philosophy of the Harappans was different. They knew that once the wealth is buried in large quantity, that is gone forever. That cannot be used for the developmental purpose. Secondly, perhaps they had the different system, and they did not feel a necessity of be creating or erecting those monumental architecture, which was of no use to the common people. So the wealth that was coming from the West, particularly from Mesopotamia and from Egypt, that wealth was used by the Harappans for the development of the culture. And that is how, at one stage, maybe in the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, the Harappans could develop cities and towns, because that wealth, that was coming, in fact, that was used for this particular purpose. So this is something to learn from the Harappans. I always give the example of Japan. In fact, Japan was almost destroyed after the Second World War. In fact, I visited Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and I've seen the destruction that that was wrought, in fact, in the Second World War. And everybody thought that Japan is finished, but Japan became a world economic power within next 13 to 14 years. In fact, that they showcased the development, economic development that they did. In fact, in 1964 Olympics that they arranged in Tokyo, and what Japanese did, in fact, was exactly same as the Harappans did, in fact. So I always think that I always believe that that the knowledge that was there in the past, that continues, and that is being used by maybe the local people here, and that knowledge has also spread all over the world. I don't say that Japanese have directly adopted the Harappan knowledge system, but they have learned in fact from the history, and that knowledge system must have survived here. So Japan also started like Harappan. They started importing raw materials from developing countries like India and China, and they had the technology with them. They started manufacturing finished goods on large scale, and they started supplying the finished goods to the same people from whom they were importing raw materials. So that is how Japan could develop fast, and they became a world economic power. In fact, number one economic power, in fact, at one stage within such a short span of life, short span. And that means that we have learned, in fact, something from our past, and that is one of the best examples that I can give to you. So this is very important, that when we talk about the maritime history, that what we learn from the maritime history, that is also very important. So that is what we are trying to understand during our course of our actions. Secondly, also when we see the maybe subsequent periods, after the decline of the Harappans, maybe after 1500 BC till 500 BC, there was a gap of almost 1000 years. Gap in the sense that the cities and towns disappeared that time, and we were not really able to develop them again because the maritime contact had disappeared that time, and because and that had quite adverse impact on the economy. That is quite clear, in fact, that whatever evidence we have, that clearly indicates. And then again, when we started developing contacts on large scale, maritime contacts with the Roman world, again, that time also we started importing a lot of wealth from the West, and now actually from the European part of the world. And then we started using that wealth, in fact, for the development of our culture here, culture to civilization. So that process was happening continuously. And then, of course, after that, we know the history, in fact, that continuously the maritime contacts have helped us a lot. And right from the early stage, we have noticed that that along with this trade, maritime contacts, and even inland contacts, a lot of maybe elements of the Indian culture have traveled to the West also, to maybe Middle East, and also to Central Asia also. And we see the travel, the travel of the Indian culture, maybe cultural elements. Some of the maybe maybe religious aspects also have traveled from India to the to the other parts of the world. And so we can also see the the cultural impact. And that was not one way, of course. There was a lot of things also were coming from that side, and a lot of amalgamation was taking place. In fact, in India, we can see the jail, in fact, of the local tradition, and the traditions that were adopted from the other parts of the world. And that was happening, of course, because of the trade contact, both, in fact, the maritime trade and the land route trade. So that was happening, right from the beginning, and that continues until till today. Now we also have one wrong notion, in fact, that maybe at some stage people have come, in fact, they invaded in fact India, and they finished our maybe our culture and our people, and they established a new culture. That is a myth, in fact. No, we do not have such kind of evidence at all. What we see, in fact, in India, excuse me. What we see, in fact, in India is that there is a continuous history. At least we can trace it up to 5,000 years. In fact, for 5,000 years there is a continuous history, and we do not see that that at any stage our culture was maybe discontinued, or our genes were discontinued or our genetic history was discontinued at any stage. What we are seeing, Pat, is that a lot of maybe people are coming here, traveling here maybe for trade purpose and for other purpose, but they never really tried to finish the Indian cultural elements or Indian people. On the other hand, what we are getting, in fact, is the evidence of the amalgamation right from the beginning of the settled life in this part. So this is important, and this can dispel, in fact, a lot of misunderstanding that we have about Indian history. So this was happening continuously, and then you will be wondering that why there is a decline, in fact, in cultural history, in fact, at one stage, maybe at regular intervals. I mentioned about the period between the disappearance of the Harappan culture and the emergence of the second urbanization, that is around maybe 4th or 5th century BC. So the people were there, of course, the cultures were there, in fact, but the culture never grew, in fact, into civilization during this particular period because of the lack of the large scale contact with outside world, and we were not really getting a lot of wealth from the outside world. But then we also see that the sea has also played important role. There is a lot of evidence of the fluctuation of the sea. The sea level is fluctuating from time to time, and there is one very important fluctuation that we can notice maybe around 1900 BC, and that is very well documented and authenticated by some geologists from the MS University Baroda. They have carried out work on the Saurashtra coast, and they have established that the sea level has gone down. How much, it is not clear, but certainly sea level has gone down. So what happens because of the sea level changes, maybe sometimes this change has impact on the maritime trade, and that was quite clear, in fact, after the after maybe 1900 BC, the sea level went down by maybe 3 meters to 4 meters, and that had really adverse impact on the Harappan economy. Harappans had developed number of ports on the western coast. Nearly 32 sites have been identified as the Harappan ports, which were developed maybe during the middle of the 3rd millennium BC. But then by 1900 or 1800 BC, these sites or these Harappan ports became inland sites because the sea level had receded, had gone down, and these ports could not function as ports anymore, and that had impact, in fact, on the Harappan economy. So after that, till 5th century, 4th century BC, we were not able to get a lot of wealth from outside the country or outside South Asia. So this is quite happening periodically, and I believe that when we study the Harappa, any trade, maritime trade or maritime contact, I think we have to keep this in mind that what is the relation between sea and the man or the culture. That is very important, and that is the under project Mausam also. We are trying to understand that part. In fact, we are trying to reconstruct the culture, the environmental part, maybe the currents of the sea, the science of sea, etc. We are trying to understand, and how that has really helped the people from time to time to develop the maritime contacts. So that part is very important, that culture and climate or environment, they go hand in hand. So when we study any history of maybe maritime trade, we need to understand this particular aspect also. And secondly, how the cultural elements, they travel from one region to another region, and how trade plays important role in that. Even today, in fact, you must have noticed that that there is so much movement, in fact, of the people, of the goods, in fact, from one region to another region, and that ultimately commands the maybe the economical maybe hierarchy or level of the country. So that was happening from time to time. So in this part also we need to understand that. And then after the decline of the Roman maybe trade, Roman contact, we don't have much evidence. In fact, we say that we had contact with China, but we do not have sufficient evidence for that. Though we can clearly say that that contact was there, because we do find some Chinese material here also, and some material Indian material in China. Similarly, we also know that that India has influenced a lot. In fact, the Southeast Asian countries, a lot of mythologies have traveled there, and some elements from that part also have come here. So we need to really understand, how these things were contributing or developing or shaping the cultural elements of maybe the other countries also, and how our cultural elements also were being shaped because of the contact. That is also very important. And lastly, the tradition that we have is so rich and so relevant even today, that even today, in fact, there are a lot of communities in Gujarat, of course, in Manvi, there's a flourishing maybe shipbuilding activity happening, and those people are following the traditional method of shipbuilding. So we need to really understand that. We need to study that before this particular tradition disappears. That needs to be properly documented. And even if we are able to build big ships and maybe warships, etc., these small ships also play important role. Particularly, I can give the example of the dhow trade that is happening between Oman and Kutch part of Gujarat. And even today, in fact, they are using the same age-old boats for carrying out this dhow trade. And it is so important, so relevant, in fact, for both the countries, that there are a lot of communities who are still dependent on this particular trade. So that needs to be highlighted also. Then the navigation system that we had, the Harappans followed that. We don't have much evidence about what exactly the navigation system Harappans followed, but probably the compass was developed by these Harappans, which may have been maybe the early form of compass developed by them for navigation purpose. But then when we study the traditional navigation system in the country, which is still alive, still surviving, then we can try to project, in fact, what could have been in the past. So that is how we had to really use a lot of this ethnographic data for the reconstruction of the traditional maybe activities which are connected with the maritime and the sea. So these are the important parts. These are the important aspects that needs to be studied. And finally, I would like to say that there are a few important organizations like Maritime History Society is there. Then there is a Maritime Research Society in Pune, in fact. And I happen to know Commodore Rajan Veer, in fact, who was very much part of this. So they are also doing very good research activities in this particular aspect. Then this in Chennai there is a Maritime History Society. Now that will be brought, in fact, to Gujarat, and the National Maritime Heritage Complex that is coming up. That will be under this particular society. So all these 3 or 4 different societies, they need to have proper coordination. Maintain your identity, but you should have proper coordination. And some maybe projects should be undertaken jointly, so that the expertise from which are spread, that can be brought at one place. And I will also request that all of you, that the National Maritime Heritage Complex, which will have a National Maritime Heritage, National Maritime Museum, a state-of-the-art museum. And apart from that, we are also planning a research, National Maritime Research Organization, and also conservation center. So let's make these centers, like research centers and conservation centers, quite vibrant. Let's that should be the facility for the country. We can use that facility for carrying out the trade, and we can also allow maybe the scholars from these 40 countries, at least which are on the Indian Rim area, they can come also here, and they can participate in the research activities that we are planning. So these are some of my thoughts that I wanted to share with you. And again, before I close, I would like to thank Commodore Johnson and his team for inviting me here and giving this honor. And we will be happy, in fact, at National Maritime Heritage Complex to get your maybe support, your help, and also we will be happy to maybe connect with your society also, so that we can share some of the ideas, and let's take this the maritime research activity to the next level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. All I have left to add with that broad sweep is that you have so beautifully highlighted that the maritime sector is inherently collaborative. It operates across agencies, operates across countries, and we are very honored that you not only bring the wealth of much of material culture and teaching that you have done in the past, but today, as an organization and as maritime enthusiasts, we look forward to the National Maritime Heritage Complex and its success, and we wish this entire endeavor. You have really set the tone for the first ever National Maritime Heritage Conclave. So it's more than coincidence that we have the same alphabets, NMHC, and I think
Yes,
that will be a good
NMSC,
link.
yes, right.
Yes. May I just ask? I know it's a keynote, but maybe a word of encouragement to say young students in a line or two, why should they take up maritime studies and maritime heritage as an elder in education? Give us one message for the younger scholars.
See, in India now, maybe 5 years ago, in fact, the situation was different. There was not much scope, in fact, in this particular field. But now, there are maybe number of institutions who are becoming, either, very proactive, or there are some new projects coming up, in fact, in the country, and this will grow on now. This will not stop here. It will increase. So now, if, there are students who are interested in getting proper training, they can, get associated with the NIO also. The NIO has the maritime, you know, this maritime archaeology wing, in fact,
Yes.
NIO. So they provide, training. They can also get, maybe associated with the Deccan College, which has initiated, this maritime archaeology course. So the part of the course, the theoretical part is done in fact in Deccan College, and the practical aspect is done in Goa in collaboration with the NIO. So they can get proper training, and they can now, in fact, they should come back and serve the country now, because the country needs these type of projects now, and it is going to grow in a very fast scale. The government of India has identified this as a key, maybe area of development, and they're going to do that. So I will request that that now there is a facility available, in fact, in the country for the training purpose. We are doing the maybe capacity building in fact in the country, and those who have already got training from outside, they can join this endeavor, and those who are maybe aspiring to be maritime archaeologists or maritime historians, they have good news that that we are now providing the training, in fact, to. And finally, that the National Maritime Heritage Complex that is coming up, we also have one important component, that is a training component. So we want to train the new generation, in fact, in the country, who can contribute immensely, in fact, to the development of the maritime history, in fact, in the country. Not only showcasing the maritime history, not only preserving the maritime history, but how we can learn from the maritime history of the country, and how that knowledge can be used for the future developments. That is also important, and I'm sure that the new generation will develop now. A lot of students are coming forward, and many more will come forward, and they will try to participate in this nation building activity, which is very, very important for the country.
So thank you so much, Professor. We look forward to the many people who are participating in this conclave, to the agencies that are involved, that together we will work to see that India takes its position back as a maritime power. Thank
Yes,
you for
certainly.
joining
Thank you
us.
very much. Thank you very much. Well,
Thank you to the esteemed panelists of the inaugural session. We are a little behind time, but I must acknowledge this from what we have heard in the first session. There is a clear stream of thought which is across from when the chairman spoke and talked about the need for this enhanced maritime consciousness. I'm going to bring up Professor Shanta Kumar also up on stream. I know I have not prepared him, but it's glad to be together. We both have heard Professor Vasant Shinde and his broad sweep of the, particularly from a built heritage. And incidentally, that's so close to where Gujarat Maritime University and Dr. Shantakumar, you are really straddling two institutions. I am bringing this time up to express both solidarity between institutions. Gujarat Maritime University, I've had the privilege of coming across and being taught in the premises of the GNLU. And sir, I wanted to have a closing word for a minute of the need for us to take this journey forward. It's okay, we are a little behind time, but there is a resurgence and an awakening happening in the country. Do you want to leave a closing message before I hand over back to the anchors? You could unmute, sir.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, if you look at the theme, remembering the heroes of the past, not leaving even a frame, the kind of words that you have used, it's really amazing. And in fact, any nation, when it progresses, it doesn't progresses in a day. It happens over a period of time with the efforts of lots of people. But then in the process, the contribution of many of us goes unnoticed. And that is where we feel highly obliged to the Maritime History Society for taking cognizance of this and for spending some time, in fact 2 days, in remembering all those unsung heroes, to not to miss out even a single frame of the events which had happened in recognizing the country what we are today, especially the maritime society that has evolved over a period of time. And therefore, I sincerely appreciate the efforts of the Maritime History Society in recognizing the contributions made by millions of the coastal communities, especially the women being the focus. I was really very, very happy that in the maritime sector there is a society which is focusing its attention on women who had been the forgotten lot even today. That is what I refer to the ILO study, which says that less than 2% of women are there in the maritime sector. So this is something which we need to work together on and see that we bring adequate representation to women and to make the ocean governance an equitable place where everybody has a role to play. Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Shantakumar. And the purpose of bringing up Dr. Soni and all of us is we are at the business end as we close this inaugural session, and I'll hand back to Dr. Soni. We are committed to the larger audience. I want to say good days are lying ahead. We are going to catch this rising surge of maritime awakening. We will bring academics, we will bring material culture, we will bring practices, we will make things happen. Just connect with us, enjoy these deliberations. I also want to say I'm sorry for certain technical glitches. What we are going to do is whoever has registered, we'll keep sending you the links of the session. It will be public on YouTube, and that can enable you to connect. So with that, I hand over to Dr. Soni for the closing instructions, and the next session is going to start at 11:15. Thank you. Shanno Varun, Jai Hind. Over to you, Dr. Soni.
Thank you to Professor Vasant Shinde, and thank you to Professor Shantakumar also. We now end the inaugural session to meet in a few minutes. The link for the same shall be available to you. It's here also. Let us gather once again to proceed with the first thematic session on the coastal communities. The session shall be moderated by Radhika Session. See you there at 11:15. Thank you.